I'm Simeon Corty from BBC Wiltshire. Welcome to Speak to Peake. Tim Peake is the first European Space Agency-funded British astronaut, and later this year he'll launch from Earth to spend 6 months on the International Space Station. Today, at the UK Space Agency headquarters in Swindon, Wiltshire students from a range of different schools have gathered to link up live with Houston, Texas, to ask the man who made Salisbury his family home their own burning questions. Tim Peake in Houston, can you hear us?
I can hear you loud and clear. Good afternoon, Simeon, and all the Wiltshire students who are with you. It's great to be joining you this afternoon.
Thank you very much. You made a good point there. It's afternoon for us, mid-afternoon here in Swindon. It's breakfast time for you in Houston. Tim, what would a normal Monday morning be like in astronaut training if we weren't interrupting your day? What will you do straight after this?
That's impossible to answer. There is no such thing as a normal Monday morning. Every week is different. Often I'm in different locations. Next Monday, for example, I'll be in Star City in Moscow, and the Monday after that, I'll be down in Baikonur in quarantine as backup crew for the next Soyuz launch. So it's a very varied lifestyle. Obviously, we spend a lot of time training, and we go to all these different locations around the world to do the various bits of training that we have to do. But that's one of the great things about the job, is the variety.
Your first question from a Wiltshire student, Tim, is from Esther Bailey from Pewsey Vale School. Esther, what's your question?
What is it like knowing that in just 6 months' time you'll be out of your home planet and not be able to go back if something goes wrong, or if you just get lonely?
Hi Esther, that's a great question, and I mean, you bring up a really good point about what it feels like to be in space and the level of isolation that you're exposed to. And there are some things that I've done to kind of prepare me for that, and actually in some strange way I'm kind of looking forward to experiencing that isolation and feeling what it's like. But for example, I spent 7 nights living down a cave in Sardinia, and this was really part of an experiment to get us used to working together as an international group of astronauts. And it took us 12 hours just to get to the campsite. So there was no easy exit from this cave. There was lots of technical rope work involved. And also I spent 12 days living underwater on a Nemo mission. And of course, our bodies were completely saturated with nitrogen, so we had to go through 18 hours of decompression before we could safely come back to the surface. So those kind of environments get you used to feeling what it's going to be like a little bit in isolation. But being in space on the International Space Station, of course, takes it to another level of magnitude. But we can get back, you know, if there is a real problem. We have our Soyuz spacecraft with us. That's like our escape vehicle. It stays with us for the whole 6 months during our time on board. And if we really needed to, we could be back down on Earth within about 12 hours.
And with regards to missing your family, as Esther pointed out, what are communications like once you're up there? How often will you be able to talk to them?
Yeah, I don't think I'm actually going to be lonely in space. I've got great crewmates who I've been training with a lot, and I get on really well with them. And we have really good communications today on board the space station. We have a phone over the IP system, so we can use a laptop to call home every day if we want, and to call friends and family. And once a week we get a video conference with our families as well. So there's certainly lots of interaction with friends and family. And of course, we now have live internet as well. We can even use Twitter, for example, and Facebook from the International Space Station.
Tim, hundreds of students from across Wiltshire wanted to talk to you, and the way they were chosen was they each pitched the question they'd like to ask you, but also the reason they wanted to talk to you. And Esther's reason was that she goes to a very rural school, and it's quite a small school, and she just thought it would be amazing to speak to an astronaut. What kind of school did you go to, and did you have ambitions to be an astronaut back then?
So I went to Chichester High School, which is where I lived and grew up. I was born in Chichester in the south of England. And really when I was in my teenage years, I started working, or I joined the school's cadet force. and that really steered me towards a career in aviation more than wanting to be an astronaut. I went gliding, and I started flying small aircraft, light aircraft, chipmunks, and I never looked back. From that moment, I knew I wanted to be a pilot. That was my dream and my goal. And I ended up joining the Army Air Corps as a pilot a few years later. And really, it was a series of sort of progressive steps towards becoming an astronaut, because I liked flying so much, I decided I wanted to teach it. I became an instructor pilot. And then I loved aviation. I did a degree in flight dynamics, and I decided I wanted to test aircraft, and so I became a test pilot. And it was as a test pilot that I started working more closely with the space industry. And then the European Space Agency in 2008, they held an online application for the new selection group for astronauts, and I was in the right time at the right place to join.
We've been hearing a lot about the work you're doing with schools, not just around Wiltshire, but around the country. One of those is the Rocket Science Project that we've just been discussing here in this room in Swindon because of what happened yesterday, of course, with the SpaceX rocket. It was taking supplies up to the International Space Station. It was taking 2 kilograms of rocket seeds with which pupils would be able to help you with your experiments. When an accident like that happens, I would imagine anyone who works in the space program, obviously it's a blow to them. But for you personally, how worried are you that a failure like that might have a knock-on effect to your own mission later in the year?
Well, these failures, like you said, they are a huge blow. They're a big disappointment to everybody involved, and especially with something as you get closer to launch, you get sort of more connected, and you associate with the actual payloads on board. And I really do understand, and I know just how much work and effort has gone on, not just by the SpaceX crews, but by all the other crews who have got payloads on that vehicle. So it's a huge disappointment, and it will have an impact on our mission, because there were large payloads such as the International Docking Adapter and an EMU, which is one of the spacesuits. So you have large pieces of hardware. But this also highlights the fact that, you know, spaceflight is really hard. It is cutting-edge technology. What we are doing is we are pushing science and technology and engineering. We're pushing the companies that support space exploration to their limits. And this is an example of something that can go wrong, and it's something we plan for. We are always remaining very flexible in the space industry. You know, prior to this, there was an accident with the Progress vehicle, and we've had to reschedule, and we'll simply reschedule and replan after this one again. And SpaceX have enjoyed, you know, huge success up until this point, and I'm sure they'll pick themselves up and will work out what went wrong with this vehicle and get back on the right track in a very short period of time.
Your next question, Tim, is from David Wildman. David goes to Rowdford School in Devizes, and David has preloaded his question onto his iPad. Let's hear it, David.
Would I need a wheelchair in space as I need to use a wheelchair on Earth? I would like to know if there has ever been a disabled person in space.
Hi, David. That's a really good question. And you know, I can't think of any reason why you would need a wheelchair in space at all. I mean, being in zero gravity and floating and weightlessness is a very liberating experience for everybody. I don't know of any disabled person that's been in space, but I do know that Professor Stephen Hawking went on a parabolic flight, which is otherwise known as the vomit comet, where you do a series of parabolas and you experience zero-G, you experience weightlessness for about 30 seconds at a time. Now, Professor Hawking suffers from a form of motor neuron disease, and so you know, he found this experience incredibly liberating and amazing, and actually said that he didn't want it to stop. And I've also heard from astronauts on the space station that actually your legs just kind of get in the way, and they can always tell a rookie astronaut because they come on board the space station and they start knocking things around, kicking cameras, pulling off cables with their legs, because you just kind of don't know what to do with them. So you have to get used to that whole body feeling in weightlessness and how to control your body in weightlessness. But certainly no need for a wheelchair as far as I can tell.
So David might not get into space immediately, but there'd be nothing to stop him having a go in that vomit comet that you talked about then.
Absolutely not, no, and it's a wonderful experience. I highly recommend it. It's great fun.
What does it feel like to be weightless? You've had a few goes in that, I'm sure.
I have, yes. I mean, it feels really strange because there is no up and down, so you can twist your body around and you don't get any blood rushing to the head when you're upside down, of course. And we had a little bit of practice maneuvering some objects which were, heavy back here on Earth, but of course as soon as you go into weightlessness they've got their mass. You can feel the mass of the object, but they're very easy to maneuver around, very light. So it was just really weird to experience this. Of course only 30 seconds at a time. It's a very brief period and your body doesn't fully adapt to weightlessness, and so that's the next step, is on board the space station, is when your body actually starts really adapting and you really live and work in space for a long period of time.
Strangely enough, this subject does connect to our next question. This is Poppy Merridew, and Poppy goes to the Stonehenge School. Poppy, what's your question?
What happens when you vomit in space?
Hello, Poppy. Well, you raise a good question, and it's actually a question that a lot of people have put a lot of thought into, because people do vomit in space all the time. It's quite common because being in space is very disorientating for the body. The vestibular system gets all messed up and your brain has to work out what's going on, and it really has to shut down the ears and rely more on the eyes. But whilst that process is happening, you feel pretty unwell, and it's very hard to tell who's going to be susceptible to this or not. Sometimes fast jet pilots with many hours of experience get space sick, and other people who've never flown before don't get space sick. But if you do feel sick, of course, we have sick bags, and that's the best thing to go for straight away. Otherwise, everything gets very, very messy. So you try and keep down the mess. And also, we have medications that can help. In fact, on board the space station, there's really a small pharmacy that can deal not just with space sickness, but we're able to deal with many other forms of sickness in case astronauts don't feel well for other reasons.
The reason that Poppy gave as her reason to come and talk to you was to do with ambitions to do with being in space. Poppy, can you remember what you put? Have you got ambitions to maybe make it up to the International Space Station?
I want to become an astronaut when I'm older.
So I think we should give Poppy a little insight into what that might be like. You've said what the training's like. What would an average day be like on the ISS?
Well, it's a great ambition to have, Poppy, and I really wish you all the best of luck with that. And an average day on board the space station, well, we're there primarily to do science. It's an orbiting laboratory. And so as much as possible, our time is taken up by doing scientific activities. And what we're doing really is we're running payloads, scientific payloads, for the enormous support team back here on Earth. And so at any one time on board the space station, there might be in the region of 20 to 30 scientific experiments going on. And actually a lot of those are with our own human body. We are a test bed. We're often having blood samples taken, urine samples, saliva samples. Our immune system is being investigated. We're doing ocular research into eyesight issues that happen in zero gravity, studying the body's aging system as well, problems with osteoporosis. A whole sort of ream of different scientific experiments are going on. And so that will fill up your day. But around that, of course, we have to keep the space station well maintained and cleaned as well. So routine maintenance activities might be going on. So at one point, you go from doing this wonderful cutting edge scientific experiment, and then the next minute you're cleaning out the loo.
You genuinely have to do all that? I suppose you do. There's no one else to do it. Do you have do they have arguments over whose turn it is?
We just follow the schedule, so there's no arguments on board, and the ground operations and planning team tend to rotate those tasks around, so everybody gets their fair share.
I can just imagine that call from Houston. Tim, guess what? It's your turn. I'm so
Something
glad
that no astronaut likes to hear.
Yeah. I'm so glad that we've cleared up the vomit, figuratively speaking, at least. Poppy, thank you very much indeed for your question. This next question, Tim, is one that, when it came in, and we looked through all of the questions that we'd had, my producer at BBC Wiltshire and I, we looked at it and we sucked our teeth and went, oh, they're not going to like this. But we put the questions to a panel of people who all worked in the space industry, and every single person on the panel wanted this question in, and it's quite a challenging question. It's from Ben Burnett. He's from Harden Hewish School in Chippenham. Ben,
how come we're spending so much money on space exploration when people are dying on Earth for basic needs?
I Hi, Ben. That is a great question. It is a challenging question, but it's a really important one. And we do need to look closely at what we spend our money on. And the first, because I often get asked this, and the first thing I like to point out is that actually we do spend a huge amount of money on helping poor people, those less fortunate than us around the world. And for every £1 in the UK that we spend on space, and that's not just human spaceflight, that's everything we do in space, we spend £40 on foreign aid. And to put that into perspective, the average taxpayer pays about £50 a year on foreign aid and only £1.25 on space. So it's all about striking a balance, and that's what we have to do is get this balance correct. And also the second thing I like to point out is money that is spent on space is actually spent on things like cancer research, on vaccinations, on diabetes. As I mentioned previously, the average day on board the space station is about doing scientific research. So we're looking into all of these things in addition to things like Earth observation, agriculture, climate change. So really the money we're spending on space is not spent on space, it's spent actually on improving the lives of everybody back here on Earth. So it's a win-win situation. And I personally think that balance of 40-1 is about right, and I think we get a lot of bang for our buck with the amount of money that we spend on space.
What kind of examples can you think of developments that we've had on Earth that have helped people in need that wouldn't have come about if it weren't for a space program?
Well, just some of the things I mentioned there about cancer research and vaccinations, for example, we're able to identify a vaccine for salmonella, which is a huge killer in the third world. And that was a major success from previous space flights that we've had. We're looking at different techniques for targeting diabetes and breast cancer, which without the help of doing the research in zero gravity, there's methods called encapsulation that you wouldn't have been able to develop these new treatments for people back on Earth. So that's going on all the time. In addition to things like fluid physics and material science, we're developing new metal alloys that you can use in turbine engines for jet aircraft that will make them more efficient, more quieter, more cleaner for the environment. So lots of the scientific research that we do on board the space station has big knock-on effects with industry and medicine back here on Earth.
Thank you very much, Ben. Good question. Good challenging question. The next Paxman with us right there. Moving along the line, your next question, Tim, is from Bethany Peugeot from South Wilts Grammar School in Salisbury, a city you know well. Bethany, what's your question?
It's 54 years since Yuri Gagarin went into space. How far do you think space exploration will advance in the next 54 years?
Hi, Bethany. Gosh, yeah, that's a great question. 54 years, it doesn't sound like a long time, but in terms of technology, when you think back 54 years, how far we've come. To try and project that into the future, well, today we're focusing on our Mars mission as our kind of midterm goal. I think in 54 years we will have achieved that, and we'll be talking about how we're going to go to the moons of Saturn and Jupiter. They'll be our next sort of steps in terms of space exploration. Mars is going to be tough. There are a few things we have to do in the next 54 years to overcome the challenges. Things like radiation exposure and propulsion techniques. We need to try and improve our propulsion and cut down the transit time that it takes to explore our solar system. So they're some of the big challenges. But I certainly think that we'll have a permanently manned outpost on Mars and also on the Moon, on both those locations within the next 54 years. And then closer to home, I think that low Earth orbit is going to become, a very interesting place. Access to space, I think the cost is going to come down a lot. We have companies like Reaction Engines who have their concept of Skylon, which is a single stage to launch vehicle. Now that is going to really cut down the cost of access to space and make it much easier for scientific payloads to get up there and for our universities to do research, for example, in low Earth orbit, as well also for tourism and travel. And then as you get even closer to Earth. You know, companies that are currently investigating suborbital flights, such as Virgin Galactic. Well, the knock-on effect for that is the possibility to have suborbital flights for transit reasons. You've got this London to Sydney in 2 hours, which is this wonderful goal that people think you can achieve on a suborbital sort of airline flight, like passenger flight. So I think that space is going to continue to have a huge impact on everybody's lives, right from the very sort of cutting edge of exploration all the way back down to planet Earth.
One of the reasons that Bethany gave for coming here today was how extraordinary she finds it that there is still so much for us to discover, and thinking how small we are in comparison to space. How much is there still to discover?
That's probably the most challenging question to ask. You know, we know so little, really. We've come a long way, but we know so little about the universe in which we live. You know, the majority of the universe is made up of dark matter and dark energy, and we call it that because we know very little about it. So, you know, we have got an awful lot to learn about not just the universe we live in, but also closer to home in terms of science and technology and engineering. And it's something that, having spoken to flown astronauts, when they get into space and they look back at planet Earth from that viewpoint, it kind of magnifies this feeling of insignificance, if you like, and just how small we are, our place in the solar system and our place in the universe. It really brings that point back home.
Just picking up on your talk of the big picture, that next 54 years, and your prediction that we will have a permanent base on Mars in that time. Why is it that people in the space industry seem so fixated on getting to Mars? What would be the point? Is it just because it's the next thing out there?
That's a good question to ask. I mean, there is an element of, you know, it's inherent in our sort of human DNA to want to explore. We've done that ever since, you know, from the early years. We've always explored the next boundary and pushed the next boundary. So there's definitely an element of wanting to explore around the next corner, and Mars is the obvious next stepping stone. But also, I think, in terms of survival of a species, I mean, we're talking hopefully a long, long way in the future. But ultimately, we know that planet Earth will not sustain life forever. And if we want to survive as a species, then we are going to have to move off of planet Earth and start to colonize other planets within the solar system. And hopefully, with future generations looking hundreds of years into the future, we'll be able to develop you know, transit techniques that will enable us to travel much, much further into the solar system, and even perhaps to other star systems.
We've got time for 2 more questions, Tim. The first is from Daniel Shea. He goes to Harden Hewish School. Stand up, Daniel, so we can see you at the back here. What's your question?
Do compasses work outside of the Earth's atmosphere?
Daniel, that's a great question. I'll let you know when I get up there. But there's no reason why they shouldn't work at all. That, you know, a compass simply follows the magnetic field that it's in, and the Earth's magnetic field, the magnetosphere, extends to about a quarter of the way to the moon. So the International Space Station is actually still inside the Earth's magnetosphere, and that helps to protect it actually from some of the radiation that we're exposed to. So it's a good thing that we are inside the Earth's magnetic field. So the compass on board the International Space Station should still work. But of course, you're traveling at about 17,500 miles per hour, so that needle is going to be moving a little bit more quickly than it would back on Earth. And really, you'd have to come out of the Earth's magnetic field in order for a compass to stop working. You'd have to get, you know, pretty far out, and then the compass would start searching for the next strongest magnetic field, and so it would start picking up the sun's magnetic field at that point there. But certainly on board the space station, it should work as normal.
How do you find your way in space then? If you can't rely on a compass and you can't rely on GPS because you are one of the things that's flying around Earth, so how do they find their way?
Actually, we do rely on GPS as one of our primary sensors, because the International Space Station's in a very low Earth orbit at only about 400 kilometers, whereas GPS satellites are out there at greater than 20,000 kilometers. So the GPS satellites are still way above us, and we have GPS antennas on top of the International Space Station that are constantly picking up that GPS signal. We also have a number of other different things, such as star trackers, sun trackers. We detect the Earth's infrared image as well. So we've got a number of different redundant methods for working out what orientation the space station is in. But GPS is certainly one of the prime ones.
Got time for one more question here, and it's from Isla Defty, who goes to South Wilts Grammar School. Isla, what's your question for Tim Peake?
Is the real process of going to space anything like what it's portrayed as on TV and in movies?
Hi, Isla. Yeah, it's just like what you see on TV. No. I think really it depends on what you watch. I mean, there have been some very good TV documentaries done recently that portray life on board the space station and training. We had last year Live from Space, for example, from National Geographic Channel 4, and I thought that was a really good program that really sort of outlined what it would like to be an astronaut. But then, of course, when you move into the Hollywood realm of they tend to glamorize things, and science fiction is pushed to its absolute limits, or the reality is what you can do with science is pushed to its limits. So then it doesn't become very accurate to what we're doing. But you know, it really depends on what you watch, and you have to be quite selective and pick out the bits that are accurate and know the ones that aren't.
Interstellar was in the news last week because some of the effects that they use in that film actually led scientists to think in a new way about black holes. So there's definitely a bit of a crossover there, isn't there?
There is, yes, and you know, I thought Interstellar was a really good movie because they did try and keep things scientifically accurate, and you know, that the concept of time dilation as you move to objects with a much more massive and much more gravity and time slowing down is a real you know, interesting concept that gets people thinking, and certainly to even try and portray on a movie what happens beyond the event horizon in a black hole, I thought was incredible. So it was very enjoyable to watch.
It can't be very relaxing for you. You've got your family out there in Houston. It's a Saturday night. They've ordered pizza. They want to put Gravity on. Would you put your foot down?
You know, I enjoy Gravity. If only, you know, for the cinematography, I thought it was wonderful to see those images of Earth. But no, I certainly wouldn't recommend it to my family. Certainly, if there was a spacewalk for myself coming up around the corner.
We're going to let you get back to your working day in just a moment, Tim. When you look back at the training that you've gone through to be an astronaut, I just wonder, what's the one thing that you've learned that you never ever would have expected you would have to have learned?
Wow. I think, you know, one of the most things that stands out to me when you ask that question was tooth extraction. Because I remember sitting at the table when there was a dentist teaching me how you pull teeth, and I just thought, this is incredible. You know, I never imagined as an astronaut I'd be having a lesson on tooth extraction. But it comes back to the point of on board the space station, of course, we have to be prepared for anything, from stripping down computers to performing minor surgery. So that was probably the most bizarre moment.
Thank you very much indeed for your time this morning, Tim. This morning for you, this afternoon for us. Thank you to Esther, David, Poppy, Ben, Bethany, Daniel and Isla. You have all been brilliant. For now, Tim Peake, astronaut, pilot, dentist, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye, everybody.